Hi, my name is Elsie Shuford, and I am a student at the Masla at Missouri State University. My research proposal is about the vocabulary depth and oral proficiency of heritage Spanish speakers in elementary grade. I'm going to narrow this information and research taking kids at the age of 9 to 11 years old. Introduction. The development of the heritage speaker competence deal with a unique phenomenon of having some language proficiency in at least two languages. In the case of the kids that I'm going to study, will be Spanish and English. However, they generally exhibit a reduced proficiency of the L1 or the minority language or heritage language, and increasing proficiency in the new language since the minority language is used just at home and usually just with family or nannies or caregivers. Heritage speakers are abandoning the use of the Spanish and becoming more monolingual speakers of English, and this is happening in less than 3 generations. So, what is the problem? Spanish is by far the most non-English language spoken in the United States. We are raising a generation of heritage speakers that are growing in a majority language environment. For this reason, they are developing an incomplete language competence in the heritage language. So with this study, I want to explore why parental input received by the elementary age heritage language learner is insufficient for them to develop native level linguistic ability. When we compare them with children that are being raised in a monolingual house, speaking the same language that the heritage speakers. So, what is my motivation? As we know, language is an important part of any society. The language enables us to communicate and express our ideas with others, and is a vital part of our culture. So the heritage language speakers range of linguistic ability and proficiency is going to be uh, diverse, depend of the case of the exposure they have been received. They're going to learn language by hearing it and through oral interaction with native speakers, in this case, parents. The proficiency tends to be impaired since they use the heritage language in a restricted way, and they don't receive academic instruction in the language. Therefore, my motivation for this study is to increase heritage language speakers' ability and proficiency in the minority language. But for this, it's going to be necessary to develop programs that contribute to their linguistic development. This will allow heritage students to avoid the linguistic knowledge gap exhibit when we compare them with age-matched peers who possess full command of the heritage language. Research question and hypothesis. My research question is, how does language use in bilingual families affect the language of heritage Spanish speakers in elementary grade? And as I said before, we're going to narrow these kids, going to do it in between 9 to 11 years old. And the hypothesis is, when the heritage language is the minority language, a heritage language speaker's vocabulary depth and oral proficiency will not develop at the same level as that of the native speaker. As part of the investigation to be able to do this research, the heritage speakers, we find out that they exhibit most of the variability in bilingual's ability by Montreux. The first aspect that we're gonna explore in these heritage speakers is the language use. The language use in heritage speakers tend to shift. The language shift occur in heritage speakers because the children are schooled in English and they use the majority language to communicate with siblings and peers. But they use the minority language to communicate with parents. But although the minority language is the dominant language in the early childhood, these children become bilingual during school age. And eventually, the language is going to shift and they're going to become dominant in the majority language and weaker in the minority language. In the future, these children will have the tendency to reply in English to their parents. Many of these Spanish speakers will not acquire their family language in childhood, and they will have an incomplete acquisition of the mother tongue. Or they may be going to experience attritions, since they will lose part of their family language in childhood. This was investigated by Montreux and Polinsky. Another aspect that we need to observe in the heritage students or speakers is the oral proficiency. When we talk about oral proficiency, we are referring to how well a person speaks a language. The range of linguistic ability and proficiency that the heritage speakers are going to reach is variable. The proficiency can range from minimal oral comprehension to full fluency in writing and spoken language. Most of these children, we're going to observe that they're using code switching. Code switching is the ability to switch in between two languages. In this case, will be the Spanish and English. And they do it to compensate the lack of formal language knowledge or oral proficiency that they have in one of the language. We have to point here that if the parents fail to fill the gap of the information about the word that he's code switching, these children will not acquire this knowledge. And he always have to rely on the code switching until he learned the new vocabulary. Another area that we're going to explore is the vocabulary depth. We understand as a vocabulary depth, how well words are known. Webb said that developing vocabulary depth typically is going to involve the accumulation of knowledge through encountering and using words in a variety of different contexts in order to learn the form, the meaning, and uses of the word. If the level of vocabulary input is low in the learners, the learner vocabulary depth will not develop to a native vocabulary level. The last aspect, but not less important to explore, is the language development. Ellis said that the language development is going to follow order and stage. In a monolingual environment, children at this age are able to follow up to 5 language instruction in a consecutive way. They demonstrate the ability to use a complex sentence, and they are able to carry a full conversation. In this situation, they are able to correctly use clauses that contain adjective and nouns. And in some cases, they're not able to use adverbs. They have a greater language knowledge, and they acquire sufficient oral proficiency, and their ability to communicate is more fluent. We're going to use some parameters to compare these monolingual kids' language development with the heritage language speakers. The methodology that I'm going to be following, I'm going to have an area of research in heritage speakers and linguistic competence. This kind of an investigation is going to be a qualitative research. The participants are going to be the parents and or the guardian, who are the native speaker and speak the minority language at home. And the other group of participants are going to be elementary school children's age 9 to 11. The variable independent is going to be the language use. And the variable dependent is going to be the oral proficiency and vocabulary depth of the kids. Also, as a part of the methodology, is going to be the instruments. We're going to use interviewing the parents, an interview, and multiple choice tests in the kids. They're going to have to select the appropriate word for a given sentence in order to evaluate the vocabulary depth. The procedure, we're going to send a consent to participate letter to the school principal, also to the parents, and once of the permission are granted, we're going to start to conduct the interview to the parents and the children. Then we're gonna give the multiple choice test to the children, and then we're gonna collect the data, and this one is gonna be analyzed. Some of the limitations that I found about this research is the demographic distribution of the Hispanic population in the area of Springfield. And some of the implication is the need of the implementation of special programs to help heritage speakers achieve the oral proficiency level correspond to the native speakers of the same age proficiency. This is my references. and thank you for listening.